I'm so excited to have my friend and fellow Obama USA leader, Jerad Morey, here today. And he is the Director of Strategic Relationships at the Minnesota Council of Churches. Now, at the council, he leads the Respectful Conversations Project, which is a peace building initiative that aims to boost empathy, improve social cohesion, and strengthen democracy through structured, facilitated conversations among people with diverse beliefs. Now, he's also a pastor and peacemaker, and he's so passionate about leading people with differences to experience positive feelings towards each other and identify common ground to advance society. You will so enjoy our conversation, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited that we finally had the chance to connect and talk and just hear about all of the incredible things that you're leading.
You're welcome, Ashley. It's so good to be able to be with you and be able to talk about chess and all the other work that goes on here in Minnesota.
Yes, yes. I was so excited because normally when I reach out about certain things, when people hear chess, they're like, okay, like what do you mean? But you actually had, you have a connection to it and a great story around it. So I'm excited that we can, dive into that too. But for people that are first getting to know you and your work, I mean, we know that it spans so many different things, right? You have peace building, community engagement, ministry, right? All of these things. So can you just start by sharing a bit about your own journey and how that led you to your role now at the Council of Churches?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a weird one, but it's I guess everybody's is a little circuitous. I do feel lucky to lead a mostly integrated life these days. You know, I grew up in a household with one parent who always perceived reality really differently than most other people. But because I always loved them and they never felt unloved by them, I spent a lot of time trying to understand why they saw things the way that they did. Um, as I got older, I learned that, well, they had a mental illness that they weren't treating. But that skill set of trying to understand someone you love, trying to figure out how somebody whose perspective is different from yours could be correct or how things could be true from their perspective, and then imagining what things must feel like from their view of the world. That remained a lifelong commitment of mine. When I went into college, I ended up studying global politics, and part of the reason for doing that was because uh, every nation has its own perspective on its own interests, and so many actors within each nation have their own perspectives on their own interests. It was a really fascinating place to be, and I feel like the more that you grasp how everybody else sees things, the more accurately you're able to not just see the world, but also predict other people's actions. And the more that you're able to predict what's going to happen, the more stable you feel and the more secure. I'm projecting. The more stable I feel and the more secure I feel in the world where I am. Um, After college, I volunteered in an AmeriCorps National Civilian Community Corps program. That's the one where you spend a year or so with a team of other folks ages 18 to 24, and they move you around to a bunch of different locations, 4 or 5 places in the course of a year, where you're like this group of superheroes coming in to do some kind of good somewhere, is how it felt like. And part of our term, this was in 2002, so it was just 4 months after 9/11, we were sent to New York City to work with the Red Cross. While we were there, I was a family services technician, which means that somebody would come to me and talk to me about how they'd been impacted by 9/11, usually about how it had affected their job, their bills, their ability to make money. And then I would figure out whether they were eligible for relief through the Red Cross, which usually they were, and what is the amount of relief that they were eligible for. And oftentimes that was in the 5 figures for rent support and grocery support and utilities and all that jazz. Um, and whatever somebody's been through, if you're able to cut them a 5 figure check, they're pretty grateful. I'd never been to New York City before. My only experience of it had been like reading Spider-Man comics as a kid when Spidey was like battling drug dealers. So that the post 9/11 New York, where there's so many folks affiliated with the Red Cross there, and everybody is just sharing their gratitude with me. It was a wonderful experience, and I would pray every night. God, tell me to drop out of AmeriCorps and just work for the Red Cross full time and move to New York because this place is awesome. Um, well, I was there. I was there over Ash Wednesday of that year, and for me, Ash Wednesday has always been like a big day in my own faith journey because it was Ash Wednesday in '97 where I first sort of became aware in a meaningful way of God, of this being that existed outside of me, but could communicate internally to me in ways that were unverifiable, but still felt very real. And that if this being was trying to communicate to me, then it's only fair that I try to communicate back. So it was on an Ash Wednesday that I started sort of like being intentional about my relationship with God. So, and it was Ash Wednesday then in 2002 in New York City. I went to this chapel. I'm Methodist, but there's this place. Oh, I always forget the name, whether it was St. Richard's or St. Peter's, but this chapel right next to Ground Zero where they let Red Cross and rescue workers in. And you go inside, and this place is full of cards from all across the world. Dear 9/11 victims, dear people of New York, dear uh, dear family members who are left. And I'm sitting there and I'm starting to feel like a total piece of crap because I have been loving my time in New York City. Um, but the whole reason I'm even there in the first place is because of these 3,000 people who died uh, in this ideological conflict that my nation is in. So where do I get off, having any fun when, again, like there's all this disaster around me? Um, Eventually, I found one card in there that said "Dear Americans," and I was like, okay, I'm not a person of New York. I'm not a 9/11 victim in my understanding, but I am an American. So I'm going to read this card as though it was, to me. And it said, I'm sorry. God bless America. And there was a big yellow squiggle around it on green construction paper, like, like it's from this kid who's just trying to give America a big hug. And then I open it up, and on the inside it says, please keep trying. I don't want a war. Signed Josh McDowell, 11. At the time, I was trying to figure out, I was praying about, leaving AmeriCorps and moving to New York, and my other part of that prayer had been, and if that's not what I'm supposed to do, God, then, please make whatever my post AmeriCorps step is clear, because I've only got a few months left in this program. And I was aware of a graduate program that was theological studies mixed with international peace and conflict resolution at American University and Wesley Seminary. And I took this card, God Bless America, Master's in Theological Studies. Please keep trying. I don't want a war. International peace and conflict resolution. So I took that as a call not to a career necessarily, but to take this next step of graduate studies in my journey. Um, those schools, it was American University and Wesley Seminary, both in Washington, D.C. So after AmeriCorps and after a few months of campaign work for a politician who was also very much opposed to the war in 2003, and after some time as a missionary, in 2003, I started the graduate program over there in DC. Well, there, I attended a conference where a woman was speaking, and she gave uh, she gave one of the keynotes, but she also took questions and answers. And in the Q&A from the keynotes, there was somebody there from a hostile organization that had a really pointed question. Um, and I don't remember what his question was, but she very calmly and without taking any apparent offense responded honestly to his question and reframed it and uh, just mastered in her response the hostile frame that he'd taken and turned it around to reorient it towards love and Christ and justice. Um, and so I went up to her afterwards and just shared how impressed I was with how she'd handled that. And she was the executive director of the Minnesota Council of Churches. She was in D.C. for a national conference. But we exchanged information. And eventually, in DC, I met my wife. We decided that we'd want to move to Minnesota to start a family. Then when we got back to Minnesota, I reached out to Peg Chamberlain, who was the Minnesota Council of Churches, and said, "Hi, I don't know if you remember me. I'm the tall guy from that one thing." And she's like, "Oh, I do. And actually, we just got an opportunity. If you want to come over, that we can talk about it." So I was like, "Oh, that's great." So I started contracting with the Minnesota Council of Churches almost as soon as we got back to Minnesota, doing some ecumenical rural concerns listening sessions. I got a full-time job somewhere else for a while, but then she got back in touch with me a year or so later, saying, "Hey, we have a couple other contract opportunities if you're still interested." So I got to work on toxic chemicals and consumer products and building faith community support to oppose U.S. sponsored torture. And that moved into all of the work that we do now at Minnesota Council of Churches, the main piece of which for me is our Respectful Conversations project, which is focused on depolarization and building peacemakers.
Oh my gosh. And I think I know that we had talked a little bit before, but I think that was the first time I really heard about, I mean, there's just the power of, um what Ash Wednesdays means to you, right? And the connection that you have with that, right? And so that's just so powerful. And that really, I think, leads into this idea of what I'm curious to hear more about is the Respectful Conversations Project, because in the time that we're in now, I mean, sometimes we're not hearing a lot of respectful conversations happening, right? So can you tell us a bit about just more about that and that inspired the creation? What does that look like?
Absolutely. Yeah. So um, there's a lot of different places to start. I'm going to do it chronologically, but feel free to speed me up at some point if you're like, okay, this doesn't seem important. So uh, in 2012, in Minnesota, on the ballot, there was going to be an amendment defining marriage as between one man and one woman. The organization that I worked for, the Minnesota Council of Churches, our board of directors is all of the heads of communion, like the bishops, whoever is the supervisor for local pastors in mainline Protestant churches, so like the Presbyterians, Episcopalians, United Methodists, United Church of Christ, uh, Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. So the mainline Protestants, the historic Black churches, like the Church of God in Christ, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, Pentecostal Assemblies of the World, um, traditional peace churches like the Church of the Brethren, and Orthodox traditions like the Greek Orthodox Church. So if you've got uh, any of those churches, like you go to the church, there's a pastor for that church. Whoever's job is to supervise that pastor for our region would be on our board. These people did not all have one opinion on how to vote on this amendment. We had some of our leaders were chief fundraisers in support of it. Some of them were chief spokespeople in opposition to it. Um, so they didn't agree on what stance, if any, our organization should have with regard to the vote. But what they did agree on was that at that point in the United States, the only other place where there'd been a public vote on same sex marriage had been in California with Proposition 8. And there was a broad understanding that the public conversation around Prop 8 had been divisive and toxic, and we didn't want to have that experience in Minnesota. And we believed that faith communities could help our states to have a better public conversation than we'd heard other places had had. So we started shopping around for different ways to get people to talk together. And there's all these models for like group facilitation, like how to get a group to be on the same page, how to move a project forward, um, which is not what we were trying to do. Uh, we weren't trying to persuade anybody, and we didn't have a specific project that we wanted to even get anybody on the same part of. But eventually, we found one model that had been developed in Boston, uh, which applied family therapy techniques to dialogues between pro-choice and pro-life organizational leaders. The model had been created by the Public Conversations Project. Now they're called Essential Partners, but they're still based in Boston. And it's called Reflective Structured Dialogue. At the time, they'd only used it with grass tops, so just the leaders of organizations. And we didn't want that. We wanted to have dialogues that like hundreds of people could show up at and be changed in. And they said, well, we don't think that can happen, but we're happy to find out if we're wrong. So we worked with them to design a sort of hybrid version, a y'all come kind of conversation, where there's a lot of structure and there's facilitation, but you're not having like a 6 hour interview with each person who's coming in advance. So people could come in burdened with whatever perspective and bias they already had and sit at a table with other people who also already have their own perspectives and biases. They participate in a structured conversation with one volunteer who's been pre-trained, led by one or two facilitators who are walking around and making sure that everybody is maintaining a sense of respect and curiosity. And they go through a process that's designed to help them to share not so much like facts on the issue, not so much why they think anybody else is wrong, but instead to share their own values, why these things are important to them, where does their own life story connect with their stance on this topic, and what are their real emotions around it? Like, let's like talking about our hopes and our fears about whatever could happen. In that year, 2012, we had 55 conversations in urban, suburban, exurban, and rural Minnesota with over 1,500 participants in these conversations. Most of them were in faith communities, but we also had some on campus, some with student groups, some with community organizations. Anybody who part of their group identity was bringing people together was active in some way in these conversations. And we never even asked people how they planned to vote on the amendment, so we didn't track whether anybody changed their mind on how they were going to vote. But we asked people, how much empathy do you have for the folks who plan to vote on the other side than you do? And that was our main number. And we evaluated these conversations at the end. We did participant evaluations, and then we did longitudinal evaluations later on. But the participant evaluations, we had north of 95% on I felt heard during the conversation. I got to share my own perspective. I have a better understanding of other people's perspectives. Um, I have more empathy for those with whom I disagree. Our average number on that was 66%, which was one of our lower numbers, but 66% empathy is still pretty huge. And we dug into those numbers and we saw that, like, well, in urban areas, that was like 55%. Once you got out into rural Minnesota and the exurbs, it was 75, 80%. Uh, and we figured it was because in the urban areas, there was more of a stigma around supporting the amendment. So you may not be as willing to have it known that you wanted to define marriage in this way in the city, because cities tend to be much more blue spaces, much more progressive spaces, much more open to same sex marriage spaces. In rural communities, there was less of a stigma associated with that perspective. So there was more open diversity of perspective in those spaces. So this led us to conclude that the model is like one of those sci-fi force fields where the harder you push against it, the stronger it is. Because when there was more disagreement, it worked best. Uh, Still, we thought we were going to be done at the end of that year. We were lucky to have received funding for it. Um, but then we did our longitudinal evaluations, and we had a 20% response rate with no incentive, which was huge. And people kept on writing in about how they're still so much more aware of how to turn an argument into a discussion, debate into a dialogue. People wrote about how, yeah, when I feel myself getting tense, I tell myself, no, let's be curious instead about why they think the way they do. Um, we had a mom write in about how uh, when her kid was having trouble in school, instead of lecturing him like she had in the past, she instead practiced a question of genuine interest, which is a thing that we practice in these dialogues. Um, and that changed not only how she and her son got along, but how their entire household interacted with each other. So it was from reading things like that that we started here at the Minnesota Council of Churches to think, maybe this isn't just about one amendment. This feels like it's a discipleship tool. Like people really are learning how to love their opponents, how to love others in a whole different way in a lot of different spaces here. So we started thinking, well, what if we don't end it? What else would we do it on? The next year, Newtown happened, uh, and the Vice President Biden at the time had been charged by President Obama to bring the nation some gun control legislation. So we anticipated that there would be significant gun rights, gun control, public debate as well. So we designed a topic around that. Um, it turned out to not be like as mobilizing a topic in our core constituency. So we also then began designing some other topics and doing workshops with communities on this is how to use this process around whatever topic is polarizing your community and damaging relationships. So it's now 13 years later. Just last year, we received the Strengthening Democracy Field Test Award from Stanford University. We partnered with Michigan State for an increase to increase our evaluation impact with pre's and posts. We learned that we can definitively state with academic validation and statistical significance that these reduce affective polarization and that they increase bridging quotient, which are both academic terms for what in the church we say is loving your enemy and being a peacemaker.
And I think that's what's so powerful about you. And I remember when you had done like one of the short talks for the Obama leaders program that we're part of, and you talked a bit about your work. At the end, there was a group session, and I was in a discussion group with a few people, and they said they went into that presentation like they have a very, unique, complicated relationship with religion. But what they said about you, what was so powerful is that you welcomed them and you felt safe for them to just explore it, right? And something about how you speak about these things and how you engage people makes them feel confident, safe, empowered. And that's what I think is so special about you as a person, right? Is that people feel great when they're talking to you. And this, the work that you're doing and the Respectful Conversations Project, I mean, that is an example of even if we disagree on things or we are coming from different experiences and backgrounds, it's about the curiosity factor, right? It's feeling that you can have difficult conversations. So what have you found in, your skills or strategies that are really valuable for people that want to facilitate difficult discussions? Because I'm sure people listening right now, they're like, well, I want to be able to engage with people and talk with them about what's happening, but I'm scared to have difficult conversations.
Well, let me just take a personal moment first because that same I was able to do that presentation, and I do remember there were so many folks who felt that I felt like there were a lot of people who had complex histories with the church for very understandable and righteous reasons, because there is toxic theology that people are being raised with that invalidates who they are, and there's a lot of churches that are still trying to repent from it, and there are a lot of churches that still don't even think of it as something to repent from. Um, but I'd walked away from that feeling like some people were hurt by virtue of me as a pastor being platformed in the first place. So to hear you, uh, hear that you were in those conversations where people, didn't walked away not feeling so much hurt, but feeling appreciated and safe. Uh, I'm reframing some of my own experience of that particular moment in a positive way that makes me want to cry a little bit.
Mhm.
So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And I want to say that, it was so impactful for me because as somebody that does have a complicated relationship with religion, whose family, whose father is very religious, right? And I had to, re-engage in that in some way. It felt safe hearing what you were talking about. So I want you to know that even in my community group and people that were, that I had spoken with, felt very great after and positive and safe after you spoke.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Uh, I'm gonna remember this conversation for a long time.
Mhm,
Thank you for sharing that.
mhm,
So you'd asked about what skills or strategies have I found valuable when facilitating conversations? What can other people remember when they're in positions where they have to do so? And yeah, being able to do this, it is, I think, important, number one, to remember that it is a skill, right? Like we feel like so much of how we interact with other people is like a default thing and not something that we have to think about or something that we can't change because it's just who we are and who they are. But so many of the behaviors that we have are things that we can be intentional about. Um, when it comes to these challenging conversations, especially if you're like able to anticipate that a conversation might be challenging, uh, just being ready to monitor yourself is one of the most important skills, just being self-aware. When it comes to any kind of conflict that could threaten our worldview or our sense of who we are or the values that we've used to shape our identities. If we do feel that there's a challenge to those or a threat, then we respond physiologically to that sense of threat. Our heartbeats increase, they get rapid, a little bit of adrenaline gets squirted into our blood system. Uh, we experience tightened muscles, tightened nerves. It's like we're getting ready uh, to physically fight or to physically flee. Um, and we don't always know that that's what our body's doing when the first words come out of our mouth. But it is absolutely these physiological responses that can shape those words, especially when we are unaware of what's going on inside our bodies. Um, so if we're not careful, then we can stumble into destructive conversations just because we're responding uh, not from a sense of I want to make peace, but I feel under attack and my jaw is tight. Um, so even doing some physiological things in advance of the conversation, stretching your neck, stretching other muscles to feel less tight, taking some deep breaths to slow down your whole system, and remember that you're here talking, that there's not a physical threat necessarily right in front of you. That can make a big difference right away. And that's an easy thing that anyone can do. The second, I think, useful skill or strategy in this space is trying to figure out what is your objective for the conversation. Because that's the thing that we don't often do when we're, especially like I'm an extrovert. I could talk and talk and talk and listen and listen and listen. And I don't know that I have any objective other than, oh, I'm with people. I'm being with people right now. I don't know like what the outcome is. My only desired outcome is being with people. Um, so remembering that if when that is your only objective, then you don't know like are we going to have a fight? Are we going to agree on something? I don't know. But if you go in with the goal of I want to have a productive conversation or I want to be able to manage this conflict, I want to strengthen my relationship with this person, or I want to understand how somebody can believe what they believe or how somebody can see the world the way they do. Um, that shapes how you are in the conversation. Um, it's fun to win an argument and to change somebody's mind, but uh, what normally doesn't change anybody's mind is winning an argument against them. Because you might walk away feeling like you won, but they might walk away feeling like they won. Or if they walk away feeling like they lost, they might walk away feeling more like you're an a-hole as opposed to that they lost, right? And they may not be wrong if you were trying to win an argument the whole time. So uh, it's you want to go into the conversation knowing what you want to get out of it. Most conversations where we disagree aren't high stakes policy battles. Some of them are. But most of the ones that we have in our life where we experience that sense of threat are not actually that high stakes. And if you go in just wanting to learn from the person whose values are different from your own, and those values were shaped by life experiences that are different from your own, and they've led them to conclusions that are different from your own, If I'm already talking to that person, then there's odds that I might already have some investment in that relationship. So how do I maintain this relationship? I can be curious about them instead of invalidating their conclusions. Why does this stance that I don't understand and I don't share, why does it matter to you? How did you jump from having, this experience when you were 12 or from hearing your parents say that to believing this now? And, naturally, after you've been listening to somebody else, you can ask, would you like to hear what I think? And when somebody's been listened to for a while, certainly they understand that, well, it's polite to say yes. And because they feel heard, like you've been listening to them, they become curious about you too. Every conversation at its best is reciprocal. And this helps the person that you're talking with try to listen to you as fairly and curiously as you listened to them. And then the third tip is just in a large group, structured conversation. The best strategy that I can recommend is just framing the topic appropriately. You know, it's not always easy to figure out, why does this conversation feel so threatening? Or, the last time I talked about this thing, uh, the relationship was damaged, and I maybe walked away regretting the fact that it came up in the first place. What was it about that I regretted? Where was the flashpoint? Where did things really go south? Um, what is the elephant in the room in this community? What's the thing that we're afraid of? Or what's the thing where you can imagine somebody whose perspective is different from yours, but you just haven't been able to sit down with somebody whose perspective is different from yours? Spending energy to figure out what is the right framing topic, what is the actual thing that I want to build peace over, where is the space that I can be curious, and also like what is a topic that no, I cannot be curious about this. I can only fight because that's what I need to do. Um, and know the difference between the two because not every conflict is a bad conflict, and not every fight is a bad fight. Well, certainly plenty. We have plenty of opportunities to be peacemakers. Um, there's a reason why agitation organizing exists, because community and unity are great values to hold, but they may not hold in every circumstance.
Those would have been so helpful for me if I when I was going into conversations because I worked for a long time in like Democratic politics, and I was so used to meeting people and working with people that shared my opinion. And then finally, when I was in a space where I was not, like my reaction would be so physical, like I would be shaky and I would like get red and I would like, my reaction was to, because I tend to be an anxious person, I would like not know what to do in that moment instead of just taking back, instead of being like, um, you know, oh, I'm curious why somebody, why you're feeling like thinking this way. I would respond and be like, well, what, like that's different than what I think. Like I would feel threatened. But what you're saying is so helpful. Like you just take a moment to say, well, wait, it's okay like my end goal should not be to convince this person that my point is right. Right? It should be to understand. Right. And I wish more people learn that. I really do.
I didn't remember that you were in Democratic politics. Do we have time to? I'm curious.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
so I also worked in the space. I wonder who you worked for, or like what auspices.
Yeah, so I really started the first campaign that I ever worked for was Hillary's campaign in 2016. And that was the first one I ever did. And I grew like when I was little, I loved Hillary Clinton. Like I had a Barbie that looked like her. It was a presidential Barbie, and I was always just loved Hillary Clinton. And it wasn't that at that point, so I was 16, like I knew all of her policies or I completely, at that point felt like I completely agreed. It was just the movement, what it meant for me. And it was also the first campaign, because it was my first campaign, it was the first one that I like lost, right? And everyone was telling me that wasn't going to happen. She was going to win. What are you talking about? We're going to be the first one. So I was devastated, like devastated afterwards because I felt lied to. I was like, I thought we had this. Like I thought that was it. So I struggled a lot. So then I pivoted to local politics. So I did tons in Pittsburgh locally, like it was council, mayor, all of that. And I ran for Pittsburgh Board of Education. And that was a whole journey in itself because that got me interested in what does it mean when young people are engaged in politics? And people did not like that I was, at that point, I was 19 and I was running and because I thought
Awesome.
I'm a young person. I know
Uh,
what people, I should, this should be, people should be excited. Not that people will, vote for me, but that people will want to hear what I have to say.
who wouldn't want a student on the board? Yeah.
Right, exactly. That's what I thought. And it was people did not want to hear my thoughts. That was hard for me. So what you're saying about respectful conversations and it just being curious, that's what I wish people were and what I wish people continue to be. And for the longest time, then after locally, I did all the things locally and I was getting frustrated. Then I pivoted back to the idea of um, national politics and focusing a lot on youth engagement. And what made this election with Harris, I don't think I've, really dived into this with you before a ton, but what made it so personal for me again was that for the longest time I was fighting for under the Biden administration for a White House Youth Policy Council. And I wanted that. And there was a group of people working on that and we were getting so close. And we knew that if Harris would get in, like this would be something that she'd prioritize. And then it's ended. So now I'm at that point where I was again in 2016, where we were hearing a lot of, she's got this. Talking about it. And then I was like, we're at this moment again.
Right.
Mhm.
No, that's a journey. Thank you for everything that you've done in that space. It's a lot of times it's not compensated by anything other than the hope that the
Yes.
world will be better in the future. And I maintain that hope, and I do hope that the future will pay you for what you've already been able to do. With other words, that can lie ahead of us as we continue fighting for a better world.
Mhm.
I worked for uh, my first political thing. My dad was a DFL precinct chair,
Oh,
so
wow.
I grew up just always being taken along on literature drops. That was like a normal thing uh, for our household. And then I'd go to in Minnesota we have a caucus system, so I'd go to caucuses and see how he runs that and the sorts of questions that people come up with and be like, wow, politics is boring as hell.
Mhm.
It's like this chore. But then also in Minnesota in the year 1990, Senator Paul Wellstone was elected, and his commercials were creative and innovative. I was in like fifth or sixth grade at the time, but I remember thinking, "Wow, this guy's a teacher, and now he's a senator. I like teachers; they're good people. So to know that there's a teacher in politics, that's lovely."
Yeah.
Um, so he was like my earliest political role model, and I felt so uh, uh, when I mentioned I studied politics in college. It was 1996. I was a college junior, and Jesse Ventura was running for governor, and he himself was an aspiring candidate on the third party ticket, the Reform Party. Um, but he had a very fresh, easy to understand way of being. So his was the first campaign that I was able to like volunteer for, that reform campaign. Uh, and that was one of those like, no way is he gonna win, but I like the guy, so I'll walk a few blocks and knock on a few doors for him. He won, and I was like, oh, that's great. And then after a couple of years, it's like, oh, well, I guess that's not the same thing as what I thought I was voting for, but okay. But then in 2002, so I did my AmeriCorps term. It was from uh, September of October of '01 through August of '02. So August of '02, I get back to Minnesota, and Paul Wellstone is running for reelection, his second reelection attempt. Uh, and I couldn't wait to volunteer for that campaign because he'd always been my hero, such a progressive populist, this short little guy, comes from an academic background, but also such a vigorous organizer and so full of joy and connection himself. You never doubted that he was doing what he believed was the morally right thing.
Yeah.
Even if you didn't agree with where his morals were at, you were like, this is not somebody who's like, where's the money at? This is not somebody who's like, what are the numbers saying? This was somebody who's like, this is what's going to help most of the folks who are just making five figures, living in a regular house, not at the service of millionaires or in special interests or corporations or pharmaceuticals. Just what's going to help the most regular Americans. He absolutely felt like that kind of guy, and it was so Uh, it felt like such a privilege. I started as a volunteer, ended up being hired as staff in the communications department there. Um, and it was also a really difficult conclusion to that campaign. He died in a plane crash on October 25th, with some of our other colleagues. Uh, and we ended up, that was so, October 25, that was only about 2 weeks before the election. We did a speed run and ended up nominating Vice President Walter Mondale to serve in his stead. Um, but it's you can't put together, as we've been reminded recently, it's hard to
Mhm.
put together an effective campaign in less than one full campaign cycle. So our opponent won in that space. Uh, but I went on to work summers. I worked for Stephanie Herseth. She was a Democratic senator in South Dakota, House representative in South Dakota. Um, and then when I was in DC, I got to be the communications director for the woman who would have been Maryland's third district's first Black female congressional representative. Um, it was a 2006 campaign, Mashonda Baldwin. When I left, even though we were like eighth in the money race, we were third in the polls. And the district was one of those where if you win the primary, you win the election. Um, didn't end up winning the primary, but it still was a good time. Uh, so I've spent a lot of time like on the campaign side of things, uh, doing all of that, and I've made sure to raise my kids with the understanding that if you want to have opinions about this stuff, if
Mhm.
you're going to gripe about this stuff, if you're going to tell me about how you hate the news, then you're going to figure out how you can have an impact. So
Yeah.
we've made sure to go, every election cycle, I get them out there just like my dad did. We're knocking on doors. We're talking about who do we support, or at least who do we not want to see in office, and what can we do for that. So I love that that's been part of your story too. It's so important for everybody who has a stake in this world to do what they can to shape the world that they're going to be living in and that the generations after us are going to be living in.
Mhm. And isn't it interesting, just like I feel like talking with people that have worked in politics, like it's such a it's an intense, but it's a special time because you're all rallying behind a person that you care about, that you value, that you think they would really be important in that seat. It's so special. I think oftentimes when we hear politics, people feel like, oh, you worked in, but like they sometimes it's a negative thing. I've gotten that. I don't know if you have, but I've had people that say, oh, that's interesting. That's a toxic, they say a toxic environment. But I'm like, we were excited about the movement. We felt excited about that.
Absolutely. I was just yesterday, I was explaining to my oldest, he's 14 now, that when you're working for a candidate that you believe in, and you're lucky to find one that you can believe in because some of them you just work for. But
Mhm.
when you're working for a candidate you believe in, you think about how to get them across the line. That's your first thought when you wake up in the morning. It's your my I don't know if you can hear my phone ringing.
Mm-mm.
Okay, great. Your first thought when you wake up in the morning, it's your first thought. Your last thought when you go to bed, it's like you orbit around the idea of this person, which is part of what makes a tragic sudden death like that so disorienting because it's like the sun goes out. Um, but in order to, it also gives you that commitment to be as much of a light yourself as you can, and to
Mhm.
keep an eye out for the other folks who are worth believing in. Because yeah, I mean, you said people talk about how toxic the political environment is, and there were definitely, I've absolutely met people who I vote the same way as, but I would not want to hang out with or have them influence the way that my kids were raised.
Right.
Um, and you know, I'm spoken with folks. I've got good friends from high school who've done active political work on the other side, and they've had similar experiences over there too. Like it draws all kinds of folks for all kinds of motivations, but the people who are motivated by ideals and by positive vision, and by a sense of agency in the world, those are things that we want to be able to hold on to, that we want everybody to have, and that we don't want to give up. I There was a poem I just read this morning. I know
Mhm.
this is a long interview and it's
Oh, I
ranging,
love
but
it.
that's okay, right?
I love it. I love it.
The poem I just read this morning, by Max Ehrman. He published it back in 1927. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but there was this line in it that I read that. I'm like, okay, this has to be like my new email tagline. He says, Virtue, let's see. Many persons strive for high ideals, and everywhere life is full of heroism.
Oh,
And that, we forget that because we talk about money and we read newspaper headlines, and we're all now these days victims of algorithms that are designed
mhm.
to make us outraged and angry and
Mhm.
depressed. But so many people get into changing the world because they believe the world can be better. And that's, so many of us. And, uh, even when you bump into somebody who's trying to change the world to, make it a way that you think is worse, and knowing that sometimes they're also motivated because they think it'll be better, and that you just don't see the same, like you don't understand, but they think it'll be better for you too. Not always,
Mhm.
not always, but almost everybody, so many people that I've spoken with. Who want to make the world better, even if it's not the same kind of better that I think, they still think that I'll in some way benefit from the better that they have in mind.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's funny, I didn't know that we shared the political, connection. And I love that poem. But it kind of makes sense now because we also share the chess connection too.
That's right.
Yeah, so could you maybe share a little bit about like just I think it's I know this wasn't, necessarily a formal question, but that I was thinking about, but I think it fits so well with what we're talking about. Could you maybe talk a bit about your experiences with chess and what that's meant for you?
Yeah, so it's been chess. I did not learn it growing up. Like as a kid, we never played it in my family. It was always like I was aware of it like as a cultural thing. I'm like, okay, that's a thing that sophisticated people do. Well, we're not a sophisticated household. We don't have fancy plates or silverware or anything like that. We can only afford to go out to eat like once every 2 weeks, and usually that's not going out. It's just having Little Caesars pizza delivered at home. So we're not like fancy chess people. But at some point, like I'd read it in enough books where I was like, you know what? I feel like just learning the rules of chess is one of those like uh, basic requirements of global citizenship. So I want to at least figure out how to understand this thing that plays a role in all these other spaces. And as I learned it, I'm still not awesome at it, but I am, I think, one of the world's best chess teachers because everybody who I have ever taught how to play chess has ended up consistently beating me at chess.
I love that. That's the
Mhm.
goal, right? When we're a teacher, if it's like you want the person to be better than you.
Absolutely. I was on, I mentioned having been a missionary with the United Methodist Church. It's called a Global Justice Volunteer in South Africa. So I was on a team there, and we did things like providing AIDS education and working as adult mentors in a uh, juvenile justice facility. But one of my teammates was from Texas, and he'd never played chess before. And there was the place where we were staying had this awesome board where all of the pieces on one side were designed to represent the Zulu, and the pieces on the other side were designed to represent the Xhosa. And it was really neat to have the board and like, okay, so let me figure out. I think these are the pawns, and I think that's the bishop, that's the king, that's the queen. And once we got that understanding, we'd be bored in the evenings. I'm like, hey, you want to learn how to play chess? And he was like, sure. And just being able to like teach, here we are in this. Uh, I'd never been to South Africa before. I'd never lived outside the United States for a real period of time before. So there's all different kinds of culture shock that you experience from the extremes of life in another place. Um, and this could be like sort of a centering space for us. Um, but yeah, it was, I taught him over 2 weeks, and I started by taking it easy on him and just saying, well, this is a move. Are you sure you want to do that? Because here's what could happen if you do. Then I went to, okay, now we're playing for real. And then eventually it's like, okay, well, this isn't fun anymore because you just keep on winning. And I can't figure out what you're doing to keep on winning. So it's space where the skills that come up in it. So I mentioned also being in AmeriCorps. So when I'd been in AmeriCorps, one of our projects, we worked with the Greater Sacramento Food Bank Services or Food Bank Services of Greater Sacramento. I forget which it is. It was a Catholic Church affiliated charity at the time. And they had an after school program where we were invited to design our own curriculum for different groups of at-risk youth who were coming. So I put together a chess tutoring space. because I'd heard somewhere that because of the way you think in chess, the way it promotes thinking about not just what you'll do next, but what you might do 2 or 3 or 4 steps down the line, and remembering keeping your end goal in mind so that yes, I could sacrifice my queen if it means I'll be able to put that king in check. Um, so all these different life skills that you pick up that when you're especially growing up in an environment with higher poverty and more of a paycheck to paycheck kind of lifestyle where it gets harder to plan further ahead than where is dinner coming from or how am I going to eat tomorrow. Um, so to build up some of those skills in the youth, it was only for like 4 or 5 weeks that I was able to run that class. But the kids kept it going after I left because they'd gotten into it so much. Uh, and that was great to hear. So yeah, it's just yeah, my relationship with chess, I don't pay attention to the headlines now. Like I know that there's this dude Neiman and there's this dude Magnus, and they're supposed to be pretty cool. And some dude sold his jeans for a good price for some reason or another. Um, but it really isn't just like the basics. This is a game,
Mhm.
but like a lot of strategy games, it's one that helps you learn so many other life skills
Mm.
by doing it. And unlike most other strategy games, you can have a broader global expectation that so many other folks will know how to play it. So it's also like a connection point. Um, I preached on it 2 years ago or last year. I've been at the Minnesota Council of Churches. I'm here full time now, but I've for the last 9 years I've also been part-time pastor at a Methodist church
Mhm.
in Northfield, Minnesota. And I was able to give a sermon there on chess and on the experience. And I talked also about Ben Franklin's essay on chess. And Franklin talks about the moral values of chess, but one of my favorite things that he talks about is, and if you're not playing like Victor, like you're gonna win, that there's just no chance of that. Then it also gives you a great opportunity to, through conversation, connect with the person across the board and through your own discipline and self-control, learn how to manage challenge in your own life. When you can't see a way through, figure out where is the victory, and perhaps in a given game, your victory might not be by taking the king, but by having dignity and character in the
Mm.
way that you let yourself be checkmated.
Mm. I love that so much. Love that so much. And my mind's already moving about, it's funny as you're talking about it and the relationship you have with it and how, youth are empowered. My mind's already moving about other ways that we could work together. And so my mind, the wheels are turning in that
Lovely.
way, which I just love how you speak about it. And it's so true. I mean, it's like what chess I think provided for me and what I see it, providing for a lot of youth is that it's this world of possibilities. And so many times people don't have control over things in their life, right? But with
Right.
chess, some people feel like they have control over the board because it's something that they can hold, they can see it, and they it's just this wealth of imagination.
Right. It
Kind of
lets you define the problem.
yes. Yes. Yes, isn't it? It's so like, and this is the other thing too when I'm thinking about chess. It's like so often we talk about, okay, the end goal is checkmate, right? But what people are drawn to about chess is the process. It's the journey that you're on, not about, oh, cool, you did an amazing checkmate, but it's like, what did I learn throughout that? What did I do that I could have done better? What did I do really well, right? It's the journey throughout it. Mhm.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that's where I feel like the most humble. Even I taught my oldest how to play when he was maybe 10, and by the time he was like 11, it was 50-50 on which one of us would win, and it's not because I was taking it easy, you know. But it's that whole the journey and how do you get there, and also like as somebody in a mentorship role, just reveling in the growth that you see somebody else going through, because
Mhm.
that's just such a beautiful thing to watch any young person flower and blossom.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And speaking of chess and everything, and I'm excited to hear your answer to this question because it's a question that I asked often, and I hear tons of responses, and sometimes people don't know how to answer it. But I think because you have this relationship with chess, and some people that don't even relate chess to it, I'm curious your thoughts. The whole thing that we're talking about with this podcast is that, when a pawn gets to the other side of the board, you can get a queen, right? Or of course, any piece, rook, bishop, knight, etc. But it's the journey that that pawn got to get to the other side. And so with that, we're talking about unleashing your inner queen. So I'm curious in your life and your experiences, what does unleashing your inner queen mean to you? And along with that, how do you unleash your inner queen?
And of all the questions that you sent me in advance, that's the one that I was like, I don't even know how I'll answer that. So let me just see what happens when she asks it. Yes. Um, and I feel like honestly, so today I'm in sort of a position like that. I don't know when we're going to air, but I mentioned that just found out yesterday that the program that I run, Minnesota Council Churches Respectful Conversations, it's our depolarizing and peace building work that won the Minnesota Ethical Leadership Award. Um, we'll be receiving it formally in May. Um, and that's a great honor. Um, I looked at the names of the folks who choose, like who vote on the victors, and there's one of them on this all volunteer team uh, who just last week I was stunning my children because I was yelling at the newspaper over breakfast because one of these people had an op-ed in the newspaper that I so vigorously and intensely resented them having published. And I didn't know that this person was on the committee until this morning when I looked. But I looked this morning, like, oh no, it's the same. So this person for whom I struggle to feel empathy myself, uh, with whom I have uh, very little viewpoints in common, um, uh, and who exists on my radar, and I exist on their radar. But to know that they were on a committee that voted for my program to receive this award, uh, I feel like there's, the role of the queen on the board involves so much opportunity and flexibility, right? And the idea that you've got the inner queen, that anybody can get to that other end and start being able to move like the queen does, however many spaces you want. Any straight line, if you can see it and you can just point your arm like that, then you can get there, right? And sometimes that means being, I don't know if the word is flexible or humble or just adaptable enough to get over yourself, to be like, you know what? I don't think anybody is their best self before they've had breakfast when they're reading the paper. Uh, and to appreciate whenever anybody who is aware of the divides between you and them could still say, you know what? Even though this divide exists, um, I still see the good in what's being done. Uh, and I support it. Now, I don't know like what the actual vote of this committee is, and maybe this one individual was the one vote against, giving it to my program. I don't know, but it was a really uh, reading this morning that that person was the chair of the committee that was actually giving me the award, uh, forced me into a space where I felt like I need to be adaptable and I need to, be able to give up uh, my own well cherished and well nurtured resentment about things that they'd written previously that I felt have been damaging to the world. Um, and say that if they were able to be part of something that saw the good in this depolarizing, peace building work, then that's yet another opportunity for me to try to depolarize myself against them. I mean, that's one of the biggest things. If you work in the peace building field, uh, yeah, and especially as a pastor. there's this assumption that, okay, well, pastors, peace builders, that's all you do, right? Is you just radiate peace and love and all that stuff. But yeah, we're all still human too.
Mm.
And there's plenty of stuff in myself that I still need to like actively get over every day. And I still have interactions where I'm still trying to figure out how can I stop fuming 45 minutes later, right? Like really, I've given my life to the pursuit of love of God and love of neighbor as oneself, and doing it through structured, facilitated peace building right now. And peaceful systems change is one of the ways that I live out that call, that I try to vigorously love my neighbor. Um, but yeah, like I'm still, despite all the spaces I'm in and the disciplines that I employ, none of them make me less human. Um, and I think being a queen or unleashing your inner queen, yeah, some of it's about like, pursuing excellence and achieving the ability to go all the way to the end of the board as far as you can see. But I think some of it is also like realizing who you are and embracing the things that make you feel like you can't go that far and acknowledging them, um, and being at peace with them, and then working with them to maybe just go one space further, right? Like, I don't know, it was about two, no, I don't know. It was after the January 6th insurrection, which was 2021, January 6th. That's when I started thinking, I've got, at that point, it was 9 years, 8 years of thousands of data points on structured, facilitated conversations. And is there any way to show that participating in one of the things that we do would make somebody less likely to become a January 6th protester, or make somebody less prone to ideological violence? Uh, and with just that question in mind, I started reaching out. At the time, Minnesota Council Churches didn't have a national profile in any of these spaces, but I went to a couple of national conferences that were all being held online in 2021. And just by chatting with people in the chat rooms during the webinars, I was able to make enough connections, uh, only only being motivated by my own curiosity and desire for knowledge. Is there anything that we can learn about how to change our evaluations so we can gauge this? Does anybody else have evaluations that are asking about this? Are there other things that we could do to help our program even be more effective at decreasing the potential for ideological violence? And it's been by pursuing the things I wanted to know the most that opened up these opportunities that we ended up having with Stanford. And I became an Aspen Institute Better Arguments ambassador that year. I was named by the Listen First Coalition as a faith ambassador a year and a half ago. We had the Strengthening Democracy Challenge through Stanford, and now receiving this Minnesota Ethical Leadership Award, and all of this, like this elevated profile for the program. All of it, I think, became with unleashing who I was at the core. And who I was at the core was somebody who just wanted to do better and was curious about what better could be. So it's really been the relationships that my curiosity has led me to. Um, and as they're like, oh, well, why is some rando in Minnesota asking about this? And then they're like, oh, wait, you've been doing this for 9 years? You've got 8,000 data points? And, there's a lot of folks that don't have as many years or as many participants in their own peace building work. So learning how much we've been able to contribute now to the whole broader bridging and depolarization movement in the United States all came from just being curious and being unafraid, going as far as I can in whichever direction my curiosity has taken me.
Mm. I love this so much. This is probably by far one of my favorite episodes that I've done. And I say that because it's so easy to talk to you. It's so easy. And I think uh, why so many people are drawn to you in your work is just your spirit and who you are and how you want to help and engage. And we're so lucky that, we have you as a leader in the community doing this.
Oh, thank you so much, Ashley. I appreciate you saying that.
Mhm.
Um, I've I've only ever been on like one other podcast before. Uh, being able to talk about chess and just having all this time, I'm sure you didn't budget 90 minutes for this, but I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, and I look forward to the ideas that germinated
Yes.
in your head about other things that we could do together.
Yes, absolutely. Now, one last small question. If people want to get in touch with you or learn more about you and your work or engage, what's the best way that they can do that?
Great. So, yeah, we're very happy to partner with other organizations, whether it's for the purposes of data collection or offering trainings in the respectful conversations methodology. At Minnesota Council of Churches, we do so much else too. So, our website would be the first place to go to, MN for Minnesota,
Mhm.
churches, CHURCHES, so mnchurches.org. That's our website. You can find out about Respectful Conversations and so many of the other ways that we engage in bridging work. It's Ramadan right now. We partner with the 20 some different mosques around the state, being a Christian voice saying, hey, come see how your Muslim neighbors pray and make friends with them so that you can uh, have more relationships in other spaces and so that the Muslims can feel more welcome and at home in our state too. My email address is also an easy way to reach out to me. Um, that's at the Council of Churches. It's j.morey@mnchurches.org. So going to our website or emailing me there are two great ways to get a hold of me. I'm also on the socials, but I try not to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll include all the links and things in the description. But I just want to thank you so much for just taking the time, being here, connecting, and just sharing all of your wisdom. It's so inspiring, and it's a great way to start the day and keep the day going. So I just thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. It's been so good being with you, and blessings for the rest of your day too.